Good morning and welcome to this webinar introducing the 2017 ATM and Self-Service Software Trends Report, presented by KAL ATM Software and hosted by ATM Marketplace. I'm Suzanne Clucky, editor of ATM Marketplace. Today we're pleased to be bringing you highlights from this year's Software Trends Report, which was just released this morning and is now available for free download at ATM Marketplace. All in all, 2017 has been a big year for the automated teller machine. As we all know by now, it was 50 years ago in June of 1967 that the world's first ATM went live in London. Now, fast forward 30 years to 1997 and the launch of the industry's first trade group, the ATM Industry Association. Then from there, fast forward another 10 years to 2007 when KAL ATM Software and ATM Marketplace published the first ATM Software Trends Report. Now, to get some glimmer of an idea about how much things have changed in the ATM industry just in one decade, you can check out the intro to this year's report, which includes an image of the cover of the 2007 edition. Half of that cover is taken up by a picture of compact discs, which today are so outmoded that some laptop computers don't even have a disk drive anymore. But back in 2007, the CD was the software delivery medium of choice, and ATM deployers were excited that it was delivering multi-vendor ATM software at last. Today is a different story, but I will let our speaker, Steve Hensley, Executive Vice President of Sales and Marketing at KAL, tell you all about that. Good morning, Steve.
Good morning, Suzanne. Thank you very much for the walk back through history. That was fun. And the introduction to the guide has a little more about that, and it's a lot of fun. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. As Suzanne said, it's our 10th time to do this, to publish the guide and to have a webinar and discuss the guide. So thanks for being along for the journey. Looking at the registration list, I see a lot of familiar names who have participated over the years, so I hope today's interesting and informative. The focus of the ATM Software Trends Guide really has changed over the past 10 years, and it's changed very significantly. It mirrors the changes in the industry. You know, originally the focus, like Suzanne said, was on multi-vendor ATM software and the benefits of adopting it. And we, KAL, since we're a provider of multi-vendor software, we thought it was very important to educate the industry about its benefits and what it really is. And so that the guide became a vehicle to do that. And as I said, the focus has evolved over the years. After we initially published it and talked about and did surveys on multi-vendor software, the focus changed to cost reduction, reducing capital expenses and controlling operational expenses. And this is very important in the years 2010, 2011, and 2012, still is important today. But there was a laser-like focus on it in those years. And that remained the primary focus for several years. Then things evolved a little bit, and Omni-Channel and mobile banking emerged as areas of focus for bank retail delivery. And those topics really do remain top of mind for bankers, but some other topics are important as well. Today, the topics of interest, in addition to the ones I just discussed, are focused around the transformation and the evolution of branch banking and the changing roles for ATMs and financial transactions and delivering financial transactions and services. So what we're going to do in this webinar is examine these trends, and we'll present the results of our survey about what banks around the world are thinking regarding these industry trends. So I want to talk about the guide for just a second and the development of the guide. We're very proud of this. It's a very, very good guide, and I think most of you have signed up to download the guide, and please tell friends and family to do the same. It is free, as Suzanne mentioned, but that doesn't mean that it is lacking in content. It's very rich in content, so I really highly encourage you to download and share this guide with the coworkers and the spouses and anybody remotely interested in this topic. So it is our 10th annual guide, and looking back over the original ones, it's interesting to see the evolution, as Suzanne mentioned. We sponsor this. It's developed and published by Networld Alliance, ATM Marketplace. Over the 10 years, it's been the #1 downloaded white paper I think in all white papers and guides in the industry. It's available, as Suzanne mentioned, as of today. Now, to talk about the development of the guide, just so you have some background or some context for what we do to produce this, it's really done in 3 parts. The first part is the online survey that we did several months ago. And I'll talk about the results of that online survey. So the charts that you'll be seeing are the results of the responses that people did during the online survey. What we won't be talking about that you'll need to read in the guide, though, are interviews that we conducted with the leading industry executives from around the world. We talked to bankers from New Zealand, from India, China, multiple banks from the United States, Philippines, Spain, Mexico, Indonesia, among others. And we also talked to suppliers. We talked to different providers, different vendors in the industry to get their perspective on these topics. So the first part is the online survey part. The second part is the interviews that we conducted with the industry executives. And the third part is putting it all together. And so we worked very hard to analyze the results, to incorporate the interviews with the bank executives, and all of that is what makes up the Software Trends Guide. And you know, it's interesting in the industry. There are several different guides that use these words, and I think we were first to do this. ATM and self-service software trends. So I guess they're flattering us by saying it's an important thing, and other people are trying to do it as well. Anyway, I think the content of this is very, very good, and I highly encourage you to get your copy. So let's look at some of the results. Now, the first thing you're going to notice about this slide is we can't add. So there actually should be 45 and 55%. So I just wanted to point that out because it's big and bold on the slide there. But as you can see, the first thing that we ask people in the online survey is to identify, are you representing a bank, or are you a supplier or other participant in the industry? And it's about half and half, and always has been about half and half. The results that I'm going to talk to you about today are from the financial institutions, and they're pretty similar to the overall results when you incorporate all the suppliers and vendors and look at the results there. But in some cases, it varies significantly. And I think that might indicate that in some cases, the suppliers in the industry see things differently perhaps than the financial institutions. And I think this kind of reflects that. So I'll point that out where it's relevant. But the number of responses, total responses that we got, was 643, and that's up from last year. So it's a similar number in previous years, but the trend is up in the number of responses that we got to the surveys. I mentioned that we interviewed a lot of people from around the world in many different countries. In regards to the online survey, you can see it's a pretty good distribution around the world. And this has held pretty true over the years. So North America, Europe, and Asia represent a big chunk of the responses, but every region of the world is represented here. So we do have a good, I think a very good cross-section of responses that we'll look at. The first thing that we wanted to really examine here is about the role of ATM and branches, and we read a lot of stories about people adding or reducing ATMs, adding, reducing bank branches. And what we wanted to find out is who's responding to this online survey. How big is the bank? How important are ATMs to the bank? And as you can see in the question number 3 there, how many ATMs do you have? It's pretty even across the board as to banks of many different sizes with different ATM estates. And then we look at the number of bank branches, and as you can see, 41% of the respondents had 100 or fewer branches, and then it's a pretty good distribution, pretty even distribution across the board. So We think we got good representation in our interviews of banks from around the world. We think we had very good response rates from banks in all different regions to the online survey. And as you can see within those responses, then we have a pretty good cross-section of small, medium, large, and super large banks. So the next thing that I would like to do is turn it back over to Suzanne, and we're going to ask you a question and survey you about some of the things that you think about this.
Thanks, Steve. I would have to say that 101% response is kind of a way to underscore the quality of the information that we got this year. It was really exceptional, and I do mean that seriously. So before we move on to the next part of the presentation, we're going to break for a quick pre-poll here and kind of preview what Steve's got coming up. So the question we're going to ask is, over the next 5 years, do you think the number of bank ATMs will increase, stay about the same, or decrease? And while our participants are making their decisions there, I'm going to do some housekeeping, and I want to remind you that you can submit questions during the course of the webinar by typing them into the chat window on your screen. We'll do our best to get through all of the questions during the Q&A session, but if we miss yours, do not despair. Our presenters will be happy to respond by mail, or email, I should say. We'll have that addressed for you on the last slide of today's presentation, I believe. Also, I want to let you know that today's presentation, including the slide deck, will also be available for replay at atmmarketplace.com. When it posts, we'll send you an email notification and a link, which we welcome you to share with others who could not make today's event. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, and Steve mentioned as well, the 2017 ATM Software Trends Report is now available for free download at ATM Marketplace. That link will also be included in the replay notification, but you can simply go to ATM Marketplace and look under the White Papers, I believe it is, tab, and you'll find it there. So where are we on poll responses? It looks like just a couple more are trickling in, so I'm going to do a little quick countdown here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and I will close the poll. And we'll get a look. Wow, that's impressive. All right, Steve, back to you.
Okay, it's interesting, and there's a couple more questions like this. So we want to see what you think about the trends in the industry, and then we'll show you what the banks thought about the trends, the same question, how they responded to the same question. And here we had 48% of you think that the number of ATMs is going to increase over the next few years, and 26% thought they would stay about the same. So 25% thought there would be a decrease in the ATMs, and I think that adds up to about 100%. So not 101 like in our side. So let's look at what the financial institutions had to say, and there was a significant difference on this. The difference, as you can see, is that banks didn't think that the number of ATMs would decrease. So instead of our participants today, 25% of you thought the number of ATMs would decrease. Banks don't see that. The banks that were part of the survey said about 9% of them said they thought they'd decrease the number of ATMs. The number in increasing was about the same. So you said 48%. The banking survey said 56%, so a similar number. Fewer of you thought they would stay about the same. So if you, as you can see here, about 91% of the banks felt that the number of ATMs would stay about the same or increase in the near term. So a little different view than our audience today. So it looks like what the banks are saying is the ATM estates that we see today are going to more or less remain the same in the future, and we're not going to see, at least according to the survey, a significant decrease in the number of ATMs available to us. How about branches? We read a lot of stories in the press about different banks reducing the number of branches, closing branches, and so forth. Well, what did our survey show us? It was a pretty even split between decrease, increase, and no change in the number of branches. So a pretty good percentage, though, 34% thought the number of branches would decrease going forward. So one of the things that we might take from this is that about a third of the banks think the number of branches will decrease, and that feels about right, considering the stories that we read in the industry press. But a high percentage, 91% of the banks said the number of ATMs would more or less stay the same or maybe even increase in the future. One of the things I think is interesting on here is I don't think we should have polled you guys about this, but I don't think a lot of us would think that the number in the middle, increased number of branches, we don't hear a lot about that. But I think that's very, very interesting that about a third of the banks said we're going to increase the number of branches that we have. And we haven't analyzed this by region, so that might be very interesting as well to have a category by region about the number of branches. So I thought that was something to point out, something of interest. Okay, so we looked at ATMs and the size of the ATM estate, and then we look at the number of branches and what we see as a trend about the number of branches. Now let's focus in now on functionality. What are the ATMs doing? What functionality is supported today? And a couple of these things are relatively new in the results of our surveys. So about 2/3 of the participants said their ATMs now are capable of dispensing multiple denominations. And we think that this is very important going forward as we reduce the amount of work that tellers do and shift that work to self-service devices, ATMs. Some people want a handful of $1 bills or a handful of fives for specific purposes. For lunch money for children or whatever it happens to be. And many times people go into a branch, talk to a teller, and get the denominations they want. So this particular feature we think is going to be very interesting going forward. But a lot of ATM networks support that today. Probably not a surprise that a lot of the ATMs around the world support marketing campaigns. Again, this might be something to look at regionally to see how important this is in various regions of the world. But as you can see, so many of the ATMs today support dispensing multiple denominations, providing marketing campaigns to promote the bank's brand, new products from the bank, and so forth. About half of the ATM networks that we surveyed support bill payments. Again, I think that might be a regional thing that would be interesting to break down by region. One of the things that we hear a lot of discussion about are contactless and cardless transactions. And we're going to talk about that more as we go. But as you can see, about a quarter of the ATM networks or ATM deployers support cardless transactions today. So this could be emergency cash. It could be doing bill payments on an ATM but not having to identify yourself by card number, doing deposits for somebody else, that kind of thing. So different kinds of cardless transactions are being supported. Cash recycling keeps increasing in importance. Again, maybe a regional consideration, very popular in some areas, in particular in Asia, and in growing in importance in Europe, maybe less so in the Americas for now. But you can see down at the bottom we have things like support for Apple Pay, Android Pay, contactless transactions, tap and go functionality. Today, it's a small percentage of ATMs supporting these capabilities. And there's a lot of industry discussion about video conferencing and providing remote teller assistance by video and so forth. And as you can see, it's a relatively small number that support that functionality today. The other thing we wanted to find out is, and we've asked this question pretty consistently over the years, what causes you pain? What keeps you up at night trying to manage your ATMs and ATM fleets? What are your pain points? And this one, the number one pain point, the need to improve customer experience, has really increased in importance over the last several surveys, where people look at the customer experience on our mobile phones, home banking, websites, and so forth, and compare that to the experience at the ATM and see a gap. And a lot of banks have identified that that's a need that they really want to address, is to make it more consistent across all the delivery channels and overall improve the customer experience at the ATM. Another thing that has been always important, these next two topics, ATM availability, reliability, and cost management, have been important for quite a while. The ATM availability number is increasing. It's going up the ladder here in terms of importance. And we think part of that is because ATMs are such a key delivery channel in particular for cash, such a key delivery channel that as we move things away from the teller counter toward ATMs and rely on the ATMs more and more, it's a requirement that these ATMs are available and that the uptime is as close to 100% as possible. So ATM availability and the reliability of ATMs, very, very important. You can see many of these others. We won't go over these in great detail right now, but time to market and deploying new features has become much more important or much more top of mind over the past few years. Again, I think a lot of that is influenced by the mobile banking channel, mobile applications in general, home banking applications, and so forth, that it's new functionality is introduced in the other channels fairly frequently, and we need to be able to do that in the ATM channel. So that's becoming very, very important as well. Also, a difficult thing is that is a pain point for banks is trying to access other banking channels via the ATM or via self-service. Is a pain point for them. In some banks, it's a very big challenge, difficult to do. And then you can see some of the other pain points that go down in importance. I was kind of interested to see the speed of ATM transactions, that they're too slow, is really not such a big pain point to banks, that they, I think in general, feel that the speed of the transaction at an ATM is at a pretty good level now across the industry. Okay, looking at the answers that we've just analyzed, which of the following statements will be true of bank retail delivery channels in 2020? So looking forward now, just a few years in advance, which of these do you see will be true? So almost half said that the number of branches will either decrease or remain about the same while the number of ATMs increase, and that's consistent with what we're seeing today. The number of branches and ATMs will remain about the same as today's 23%. So 71% of the respondents looked at this and said, well, it's going to stay about the same. Maybe branches decrease somewhat, but the number of ATMs are going to increase or stay about the same. So over the next 3 years, I think most bankers, at least the ones that responded to our survey, would say those channels aren't going to change maybe as dramatically as we think they're going to change. Things are relatively stable in that space. Consistent with the other numbers that we looked at on the far right in green, 14% said the number of branches and the number of ATMs will decrease. So, and I think an interesting number there. All right, we have another question for you, so back over to Suzanne.
Thank you, Steve. And yes, we're going to preface the next part of the presentation again as we did last time, just to find out what you think before we find out what everybody who took the initial poll thought. And our question this time is, over the next 5 years, what do you predict will happen with ATM transaction volumes? Will they increase? Will they stay about the same? Or will they decrease? And while we wait for responses, I'm going to go through a couple items again. For anybody who joined us late, I'd like to remind you that you can submit questions, and we already do have quite a few. And if you are referring to a particular slide in your question, if you could put the number of the slide on your question, that way we'll know what slide to go back to for the answer. That would be really helpful. So you can put any questions that you have in the chat window at the bottommost hand of your screen, and we'll do our best to get to all of them at the end of the presentation. Also, I have seen that we've had a couple questions about replays of the presentation, and yes, indeed, we will have a replay available, including the slide deck, at atmmarketplace.com. And when this posts, we'll send you an email notification and a link, and you are welcome to share that with anyone who might not have been able to make today's presentation. And as Steve mentioned earlier, you might also let them know that they can download the guide, which, as I am going to point out again, is now available at atmmarketplace.com. And you can download from there, or you can just wait till you receive the link to this replay, and we'll include a link also to the guide at that point. See where we are, trying to talk and read at the same time. Let's see. For responses, looks like we're about done here, so I'm going to go ahead and close this poll and turn it back over to Steve. And there we are. Wow. Okay, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Suzanne. So it looks like most people predict that the volume of ATM transactions, at bank ATMs at least, is going to increase. And we, as before, we asked the bankers the same question. Some thought decrease. 14% thought that the number of ATM total transaction volume would decrease. So there are some of you that think that, but the majority, about 70%, think that they're going to increase. So let's see what the survey said from the banks. And we're consistent here. So your thinking is along the lines from the banks that took our survey online. So comparing ATM transaction volumes today with expected volumes in 2020, our transaction volumes will, as you can see, increase significantly was 40%, and increase somewhat, 34%. So 74% saw the transaction volumes increasing. We, in our survey, spot survey just a few seconds ago, about 70% thought that. And here we did segment this a little bit to between decrease significantly and decrease somewhat. So about 19% thought that the number of ATM transaction volumes would decrease. Not many people, very few people thought they would decrease very significantly, but maybe somewhat decrease. So not many people thought that they would remain about the same. So I think that's a pretty interesting result from the survey. So about the same number of branches, maybe fewer branches, about the same number, maybe more ATMs. Again, the movement that we've all know about, where banks are somewhat transitioning from doing over-the-counter transactions to ATM transactions, maybe introducing new transactions as well that will in the future increase somewhat or maybe even significantly the total number of ATM transactions that are done. Good news for the industry, I think. Looking forward again to a few years from now, so it's not too much of a crystal ball, but 3 years or so from now, what do we think regarding the ATM's role within the retail delivery channel? Which of the following is most likely to be true? And this number keeps increasing in surveys. We've done this question for the last few years, and 72% of the people that responded to the survey felt that ATMs will increase in importance as more automation will be introduced to handle additional types of transactions. So for the ATM industry, looks like there's going to be about the same or more ATMs, and its role is going to increase in importance, and 20% said it would be about the same in terms of importance as it is today. So 92% believe the ATM will remain to be very important and maybe increase in importance over the next few years, which I think is a very interesting result considering the focus of the industry and the focus of everyone on this call to mobile banking and mobile applications and so forth. There is a role for ATMs, and it's actually, in terms of its importance and overall delivery of financial transactions and services, its role will increase over the next few years, increase in terms of importance. We looked earlier about what functionality is supported on ATMs today. How about in the future? How about in the next few years? Like by 2020, what functionality is going to be added to the ATM networks? And like with a lot of the questions, we wanted the participants to choose, the top couple, 2 or 3 answers or whatever. And here, as you can see, at 41% each are contactless transactions and cardless transactions. So contactless might be pre-staging a cash withdrawal on a mobile phone or a tap-and-go type transaction. Cardless, as we discussed before, are emergency withdrawals of one-time use pens to do a withdrawal, bill payments, those kind of things. So the evolution of new functionality to support these things, but also this points to and supports the bank's desire to improve the customer experience at the ATM. So new ways of transacting at the ATM are going to become more prevalent in the next few years. And as you can see, at 26%, new functionality is doing more teller-type transactions at ATMs. Then you can see the numbers go down quite a bit. And cash and coin recycling is at 16%. So that would be the ability to deposit coins or to deposit cash into the ATM, and then have the ATM be able to redispense those same notes, those same coins back to another customer. So that is at 16%. And as you can see, down at 13% is video conferencing. Video is one of those things that we all talk about, and we all use with Skype and other, FaceTime and other products like that. But it seems that from the responses that we've gathered over the past couple of years, that video conferencing in banking is not so high on the minds of the bankers themselves, but maybe very high on the minds of providers of those solutions. So maybe it's something that banks haven't adapted yet, or they're not really thinking about, but not so much in their planning for the next couple of years, but an interesting technology to watch how it affects the industry. And down a little lower then is using tablets for bankers to interact and so forth. So I think it's interesting to think about what new functionalities the ATMs are going to be supporting. They're going to be more important as a delivery channel, and what technologies then will they be delivering that they're not delivering today. Now turning our attention to software technology, what areas of ATM software technology will receive the most focus by banks over the next few years? And number one was new concepts for the user interface. So improving the customer experience is very, very important. Doing new style of transactions, cardless, contactless transactions at ATMs, very, very important. And as you can see with the second one at 41% is integration with mobile devices. So there is a transition going on in the ATM industry, and it's going to happen over just the next few years, where the way we identify ourselves at ATMs may change significantly, and the kinds of things that we do at ATMs may evolve, probably will evolve as well. The third item there is cross-channel integration. That's been a focus of banks for now a number of years. And as you saw in one of the earlier slides, it's also a pain point for banks. So it's something that banks want to do in terms of new technology, but it's something that is difficult to do, as was identified as one of the pain points. New technology includes a migration to Windows 10 probably over the next few years, and you see that 30% identified that as an area of focus. Surprisingly, down the list a little bit, one of the things that surprised me was that 13% is remote management of the ATM network. So ATMs are becoming more important. We're going to do more transactions of new types at ATMs, but being able to remotely manage those ATMs doesn't really, at least according to this survey, look like an area of focus for software technology in the future. And I think we need to rethink that and to editorialize a little bit, because I think that's going to be a critical area to make sure that these ATMs are available and operational for people to use. Okay, so we have a third and final survey. So back over to you, Suzanne.
Thank you, Steve. I have already added that to my editorial calendar to discuss. So we'll be talking about that a little more. So to preview our next session, or section, I should say, what is the most critical change banks need to make to their ATM network in the near future? Would that be speed up transactions or reduce operational costs, improve the customer ATM experience, migrate over-the-counter transactions, improve ATM uptime, all of the above, or something else altogether? So while the answers come into that question, I've been coming in already, I am going to once again remind you that you can submit questions, and we have quite a few, but we'll take all the questions we can get. So you can submit those during the webinar by typing them into the chat window on your screen. And as I mentioned earlier, if your question is about a particular slide, if you will put that slide number in with your question, that would be really helpful, so we can go back to that and reference it. We'll do our best to get to all the questions during the session, but if we miss yours, Steve will be getting back to any of those. I'm sure he'll have his hands full. We'll have the address for you to send your questions in if you think of one after the webinar that you want to ask, and Steve will get to that as well. And finally, I want to let you know that today's presentation, including the slide deck, will be available for replay at atmmarketplace.com. And when it posts, we will be sending you an email notification and link, and you are welcome to share that with others who could not make today's event. And the same goes for the ATM software report itself, which is now up on ATM Marketplace and is available for free download there, and we'll also include a link in the email that we send to you. And you are, again, welcome to send that to anyone who you think would be interested in those results. And having said all of that, I am going to go ahead and close the poll and turn it back over to Steve. So here we go.
Okay, very interesting. So improve the customer ATM experience was number one. I think it's very interesting that all of the above is number two, and I agree with that. And as the speeding up the transactions, we talked about that briefly, reducing costs, important, but number one is improving the customer ATM experience is seen as being very, very important. So let's see what the banks had to say. What are the most critical changes banks need to make regarding the use of self-service over the next 4 years or so? Number one, by 57%, was improving the customer experience. Number two, tied at number two, was reducing and managing cost, tied with the evolution of moving the over-the-counter transactions to self-service systems, and agreeing with our responses that you provided. Decreasing the ATM transaction time just isn't a critical change that needs to be done. People seem relatively satisfied with that. So we're very consistent between your responses and the responses that we got from the online survey. And improving ATM availability uptime was about a third, so I think that's also a very critical area. This is an area that, as a software supplier to the ATM self-service industry, that we just spend a lot of time thinking about and discussing with our clients and prospective clients. Which statement best identifies most banks' future ATM software strategy? A lot of banks, so you can see 53% said, we've migrated to Windows 7. Don't ask me about the next thing. I just did this. And as you can see, 11% said that we will migrate in 2017. So that would mean 64% are saying they've migrated or will complete this year migration to Windows 7. I think it's interesting on the bottom. 16% said whatever operating system comes on the ATMs that we buy, I'm happy with it. So I'm not going to choose or dictate the operating system that's on the machine. I'm happy with it. On the upper left, you'll see non-Microsoft operating systems. 9% said that they would be interested in doing that. We will migrate to that. And that's a little bit of a surprising number because there aren't ATMs today available for banks outside of Windows. ATMs are not many anyway. And this is something that the industry is talking a lot about now, and there's a lot of white papers on this about using other operating systems instead of Windows, and you can see the numbers, 9%. We will wait on Windows 10 to upgrade from Windows XP, so they're going to try to skip Windows 7. That number is 9%. So I think that all is very, very interesting. We're not focusing on it so much here, although there's quite a bit about it in the guide. There are other questions, but I didn't include them here. Regarding branch transformation, which is a big topic of discussion by all of us in the industry. And we wanted to look forward on this and say, as the branches are transformed, what are the things that are most likely to occur over the next 4 years? And again, we provided many options, and the participants could select 3 different options, so that's why it tallies greater than 100%. But number 1 was using a mobile phone as a transaction device. So we all know this. Mobile phones aren't going away. They're becoming more important to us as well. But one idea is that mobile phones as a transaction device, perhaps interacting with branch devices to fulfill transactions. And the idea there is that the mobile phone identifies you. You identify through it the transaction that you want to do. And then there are perhaps in-branch components like currency dispensers, coin machines, signature capture machines, whatever it happens to be, that complete or fulfill the transaction. So a lot of people are thinking that that may be a wave of the future to really tightly integrate mobile capability and then delivery channel components, again, like dispensers and so forth. Omni-channel integration of ATMs with back-end systems came in at number 2 as the area for branch transformation that they see as most likely to occur. So we've seen this throughout the presentation. So omni-channel integration with ATMs is a big pain point, complicated to do, important to banks, and they believe that about half of them, 46%, said they believe they'll see that as occurring, where from a self-service or ATM channel, you can access other channels, maybe see what your mortgage balance is, or maybe see a loan, a car loan, be able to pay those things, those kind of things, be able to see your other accounts at banks and so forth from the ATM. People see that occurring over the next few years. Migration of over-the-counter teller transactions to the ATM channel, 40% said that's likely to occur. More migration from the teller to the ATM over the next few years, and so forth. We hear, looking at the bottom of the list, there's a lot of industry discussion about technology that allows you to know your customer, to allow new account openings with self-service devices. Some people saw that as likely over the next 4 years. And then one thing that we read quite a bit about is that bank employees roaming around using tablets or mobile devices assisting customers. 25% thought that might occur over the next 4 years, but it, as you can see, was relatively low on the list. This is the final question in the bank portion of the survey. And again, the responses that we're looking at today were a segment of the total responses. It was the financial industry segment. So these responses did not include responses from suppliers, vendors, or people that work in the industry but are outside, don't work directly for a bank. So the numbers varied slightly of the total responses, and please look at the guide and look at the responses, and you'll see how they varied. So I think it's interesting. But the last thing that we asked was about challenges. So we know we talked about and analyzed where we think things are going with branches and with ATMs and transaction volumes and new things that we want to do. But what's going to be the biggest challenge to achieve that over the next few years? And cost has reared its head again. So it's the capital cost of buying the equipment and the technology to implement all of these things is going to be a very big challenge. And interestingly, number 2 is security. Top of mind, how do you maintain security and keep these channels very secure to keep cardholders, customers confident that they can use these channels and be secure in transacting like that. So those two, as you can see, were significantly above the others in terms of biggest challenges to achieve bank goals. Complexity is important, and also maintaining operational costs, of course, is very, very important as well, because as we do these changes, some of these changes are very complex, and being able to deliver through an ATM new transactions from other channels of the bank or other areas of the bank that we haven't historically done can be relatively complex to do and might require capital investment to invest in the systems that allow us to do that. So these things, I think, are, as identified here, some pretty significant challenges for the industry for the next few years. So that is the last question that we asked. And as Suzanne has said several times, please download the white paper. It's available today, so please do that. And the cost is terrific. It's free. And there's a lot of really, really good content in that. So I think now we could turn it over to some questions if we want to do that.
Great. Thank you, Steve. Free of the cost, you just can't beat with a stick. So that's great. And I really appreciate KAL sponsoring this year after year. And with that, I don't believe that we have Steve's email address. Steve, do you want to get that out so that anybody who has a question or wants to get hold of you later can do that?
It's Steve at KAL.com. That's the easy one.
Okay, good.
I have a longer one too, but that's the easy one. Steve at KAL.com. We'll
stick with that one. Okay. So as far as questions, we have quite a few questions here, and I'm going to try to get to as many as we can in the next couple of minutes.
Yeah. I see a couple, Suzanne.
Yeah, well, tell me what you want to pick out here for your first
Okay, well, a couple that I think are good for clarification. One is about the number of ATM. When we talk about number of ATMs, are we talking about ATM locations or number of ATMs installed and so forth? And what the question was about is number of ATMs installed. So are you going to have more total ATMs in your network or fewer total ATMs in the network? And I think what the question is alluding to is some locations might have 2, 3, or more ATMs. So it's not the locations, it's the number of ATMs that we were specifically going after. Another question was about recycling, and I tried to answer that a little bit earlier, but recycling refers to the technology that allows you to deposit notes into the ATM or coins into a coin slot in the ATM, have those counted, and that could be for a deposit, or it could be for a bill payment, or it could be any kind of transaction where there's cash into the machine. And then the ATM can dispense those same notes. So it helps reduce the operational cost because the machine has cash coming in. You don't need to replenish it quite as often. So some areas of the world find it very helpful in managing ATM cost. One question I think is an interesting one is about bill payments and what kind of bills are being paid. And that varies around the world. But one of the things that banks are interested in doing is being able to pay your other bills with the bank by cash, for example. So if you have a car loan with your bank and you have cash and you want to make a payment to that, being able to do that through the ATM. Same with mortgages, for example, that you have through the bank, or loans that you have through the bank, being able to pay those kind of things. One of the areas that the industry has done in some areas is being able to pay municipal payments like utility payments and so forth, which requires, of course, cooperation between the bank and the utility, but being able to pay electric bills, gas bills, water bills, those kind of things. And in some areas, being able to pay things that you owe to the government, like local taxes, being able to make charitable donations to different causes, all those kind of things we would lump into to bill pay. Someone asked about how global was the survey. It was really global. So we promote the survey. ATM Marketplace, Networld Alliance promotes the survey to all of our contacts. We did have participants from every continent, from many, I didn't count the number of countries, but many different countries. The question was specifically, does it include Africa? And the answer is yes. There were numerous people in Africa. As a matter of fact, people in banks in Kenya and other countries were interviewed. So it's a very, very inclusive global survey. One of the questions was about, are the people who responded to this really responsible for the ATM channel? I really can't answer that. I don't know. But they're the ones that would have been on our mailing list to be notified of the survey. So our assumption is, yeah, that they are interested, or they are involved in day-to-day with ATM things. Just a couple more minutes and maybe a couple more questions. One of the questions is about biometrics. And we do see a lot of interest in biometrics around the world. What many are doing with biometrics, at least in kind of a pilot implementations, is not using it as the form of identification, but using it as an additional layer, a level of identification. So you might have card and PIN, and that allows you to do certain things, maybe have a certain withdrawal limit, maximum limit. However, with the addition of the next layer, like a biometric, whether it's fingerprint, finger vein, iris, voice, palm vein, whatever it happens to be, that next form of identification gives you additional capability. So your maximum daily withdrawal amount may go higher because you have that extra form of identification. Suzanne, did you see any? There's lots and lots and lots of questions.
Yeah, I know. There are quite a few. Actually, something has come in that I thought was kind of interesting, and that was what you think the future for cardless ATMs is going to be. And I don't know that we actually specifically asked about cardless, but we did talk about mobile.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of industry confusion between contactless and cardless.
Yes.
Cardless might be that I go to the ATM and I don't have a debit card with me, for example, but I want to do a transaction like a bill payment or a deposit, or I need emergency cash and I've lost my card. I'm traveling, I lost my card. I call the bank, say I lost my card, and they text me a one-time use PIN to my phone. I go to the ATM, I say I'm doing a cardless transaction, and I want to do a withdrawal. I have a one-time use PIN, enter your PIN code. I enter that. That associates through the ATM host system, associates that one-time use PIN with your account and allows you to do a withdrawal so you have emergency cash. So there's cardless transactions. Contactless is more, I have an NFC device, a reader or transmitter in my card. I tap it on the ATM and it knows my card data without actually having to insert the card into the card reader. So there's no skimming, those kind of things, because it's contactless. It's by radio. That also could be used with mobile phones and pre-staging transactions, for example, and using QR codes to link up the ATM to the pre-staged transaction. So there's sometimes people use those terms interchangeably, and I think we need to be real careful in how we discuss those. But there's cardless transactions and contactless transactions, and it's really kind of a different, a different segment, different thing.
Great. Thank you, Steve. It looks like we're almost to the top of the hour, and there were a couple of things I wanted to cover. We had somebody who asked about, let me see, how to get to the guide, the report, I should say, on ATM Marketplace. And I just want to let you know that you can go to the top of the page. If you go to atmmarketplace.com, go to the top of the page, you'll find a tab that says Resources. And if you click that tab, the ATM software, I can't ever speak, the 2017 Software and Self-Service Trends Report will be the first thing that you see under that tab. So you can find it there. And in response to another question, all of the other guides are on the KAL page at atmmarketplace.com. So you can find that under Suppliers. Go to KAL, and you'll find past reports there. I know because I used them myself in writing this year's report. Steve, I want to thank you so much for speaking and kind of giving us the analysis on this year's report. We're really excited about it. We think we got some great stuff in there. And I want to thank, again, KAL ATM Software for presenting and for sponsoring the guide for the 10th time. So that's all we have for today, and I will let everybody go. But thank you for joining us today, and I hope the rest of your day goes really well. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you.